So in this short video, we're going to deploy a IBM VDP appliance into a VMware environment. So to do this, I've gone to my vSphere web client and I'm going to select my ESX server and I'm going to say deploy OVF template. And from here, I'm going to browse to the, it might be called Sky, or it might be called VDP, but it's the VDP image as opposed to the Global Manager image, which we can also see on that page. So I'm now going to deploy it. I've got a name for it here, so I'm just going to leave that, what we might call this IBM VDP. Literally give it a simple name, easy to spot. Obviously, we choose where it's going to go. Once it's finished validation, you can see its download size and its size on disk. Hit next. Decide which data store is going to hold it. Clearly, you want a data store big enough to actually hold the whole thing. Hit next. Select your network. Obviously, you want it to be in a network where the hosts that it's going to interact with and your global manager, which you've already installed, should all be in that same network. Now, in a production environment, you will always populate these fields. In other words, give it an IP address. Do not rely on DHCP. Even if you implement it in this point with DHCP, it has to be set to a fixed IP in the future. So ideally, at this point, you shouldn't be sitting here going, oh, I wonder what IP addresses to use. You should already have an IP address, a gateway, a DNS, and a net mask. And once it's ready, we're going to deploy it. So my deploy of OVF template is now going to kick off. If you remember, I called it IBM VDP, and you can see it's already there in a powered off state, and it's currently deploying. And you can see at the moment it's 0% down here in the tasks. So I'm literally going to pause the video and wait for that to get to 100%, and then we'll kick on with the next phase of the implementation. All right, so my deploy OVF template and import OVF template tasks have both completed. And my new VM here, IBM VDP, if I right select it, I can now power it on, which I'm going to do. So once we power it on, we're powering on effectively an appliance-like virtual machine. So I didn't need to do any install of the software inside it. Everything is pre-installed and ready to go. Because I chose to use DHCP as opposed to using a fixed IP, what I need to do now is wait for the IP address to appear here. So I'm literally going to wait for the boot up. You can see there's a tiny little console here. We're going to wait for that to finish. And once that's finished, I'll know the IP address. Then we can move on to the next stage of the implementation. So again, I'm going to pause and I'll come back to you when that's finished. So we paused and waited for the IP address to appear, which it did, 10.65.5.169. So that's a DHCP assigned IP address. Now, what I've done is I've opened up my web page to 10.65.5.169. Now, it has automatically gone to install. You don't need to type that. Just literally hit the IP address that you saw in the vSphere web client, which is this one right here. So now that I've hit it, I have an appliance install. This is an installer page. Now, if you followed the global manager, we didn't have to do this. This is a separate step. And the reason is there's a little bit more complexity here. There's several more things we need to do. Now, notice it's picked up a fixed IP, which is actually using the DHCP address. In this case, I'm going to leave this. In a production environment, you wouldn't do this. Notice it's picked up a appliance name, and I think this is actually the previous name given. So again, I'm just going to call this IBM VDP. It's picked up a DNS, it's picked up a subnet, it's picked up a gateway. These are all good things. Now, the infrastructure you will need to change. It defaults to AWS alphabetically. Change it to VMware. The time zone you also need to change. Now, I am in the beautiful city of Melbourne, so I need to go Australia and then find Melbourne in the list. Now, there's this thing here called the system UUID. This is used for licensing. So if you want to license your Sky before implementation, or you want to install it with a dedupe pool different to 5 terabytes, you need to stop right now. Also, if you want encryption for your Sky, you need to stop right now, get this system UUID, and contact your licensing specialist to actually get this turned from a UUID into a license key. Now, remember, if you remember from the download panel, when we first downloaded this, there was a license key file. As I said, it doesn't do you any good. I was telling you the truth. The license key will be supplied here will be extraordinarily long. Now, if you don't do anything on this panel, if you just leave it and move on, that's fine. You can do that, and you'll get a default 5 terabyte unencrypted VDP, which for proof of concept purposes, and in fact for many production purposes, is exactly what you want. So in my case, I'm happy. I'm going to move on. I need to supply an admin password. This is the default admin password. So there is always a default admin user with a default password. I've done that beautiful password of password. And now I'm going to hit next. Now when we get to this panel, I'm in trouble because I need to allocate 3 additional disks to the VDP in addition to the one that's already been auto-allocated when we deployed the OVF, which was the boot drive. That was 130 GB. I now need 3 more disks. Now, I haven't allocated them. So what I can do is I'm going to go back to the vSphere web client and I'm going to go to the configure panel here, and I'm going to add 3 more disks to this particular SKY. So I've gone to edit settings. Now, remember, if you're using the classic interface, you will have a different picture to the one that I'm using. Now, the implementation guide does show you a whole bunch of useful information about how to set this thing up. Please read that guide in terms of using dedicated interfaces, using specific sizes. It also talks about using thin provision versus thick provision and so on. I am cheating here. I'm just doing this very quickly, quick and dirty, just to get this implementation on the go. Now, I might be in trouble here. I'll see what happens. Because I might have a problem here with sizing in terms of the available space in the data store. Okay, by the magic of video here, I've just got my 3 new drives set up. Had to disable storage DRS, which was getting in the way of me doing so. Now, I have also cheated here and I've used thin provisioning. Do not do this, particularly if you're in a storage, in a performance-sensitive environment. You don't want to do this. You always want to use thick provisioned eager 0. Anyway, I've added 3 additional disks. In this case, I've chosen to use 400 GB, 1024 GB, and 1024 GB. So I'm going to add those 3 additional disks to my virtual machine. And once that task has been done, I can then go back to my installer. And on my installer, I'm going to rescan, which is actually just this cute little button here. Now, in a perfect world, what you should do is add these disks before you power it on. But as you can see, I've successfully managed to get away with adding them afterwards. Now I'm going to drag these disks into the pools. So see, I drag the 400 into the primary pool, drag the 1024 into the snapshot pool, and drag the other 1024 into the dedupe pool. Now these minimum sizes might change in a future release, but this is what they are right now. So always check the guide, always check the doc. I'm going to do a validate installation. And provided I've set up everything correctly, it will automatically pop me into step 3, which it's done. Good. So I'm now ready to move on. I hit the complete installation button. Now at this point, it's going to do a configuration task, and once it's done it, it'll reboot the VDP. Now, what I strongly recommend here is basically get a cup of coffee, go away for 30 minutes, and leave this to do its job. Don't bother it, and come back in 30 minutes time, and I'm going to, again, by the magic of video, truncate this and show you how to validate that it's up and running once it is actually up and running. Okay, so again, by the power of the magic of video, I've waited for the appliance to do the implementation and reboot, and I'm now going to show you how I validate the appliance is up and running and ready to go. So I'm going to reopen a web browser, and I'm going to go to HTTPS and my IP address. So be careful. If you put in the old IP address, you might get a browser memory, a cached bit of the installer. So make sure you go HTTPS and the IP address, just like I've done here, but with your IP address. Hit enter, and you should get this panel called the Resource Center. If you get the Resource Center, you know your appliance is up and running. And now we're ready to move on to the next and final stage of the implementation, which is adding the VDP to the AGM, or the global manager. So if you remember yesterday, we implemented a global manager, which is this guy here. So he's on 10.65.5.168. So what I'm going to do is open up my web browser and hit 10.65.5.168, and I'm going to get my logon panel, and I'm going to log on as admin with my password, which I defined at the start, and I get this straight up message: you do not have any appliances. So I'm going to hit OK, and I'm now going to put in the IP address of my VDP, which is this guy here, 169. Admin user is default, and again the password on the VDP, which is password. Now it's going to do a process of import. Now in this case, we know that there's nothing else has ever been imported, so this is going to be fairly quick and easy. Add appliance, an import will run. It says, okay, it's been successfully added. I hit exit. And now if I go to my dashboard, I can see that I have one appliance. Clearly, as I get more appliances, I can go back here to my domain manager, to my appliance list, and use the add appliance button to keep adding more appliances. Obviously, if you're building a lab, or you're doing a POC or a demo, you're only going to need one VDP and one global manager. So at this point, you're now ready to move on to the next phase of your implementation. So hopefully that was useful too. Thank you for following along.